All right, so here we are.
Hey,
Hi,
Steve.
BJ.
How was your week?
My week was interesting. Had a lot of fun this week, and it was an off week. We have fall break here, so they're off, and then next week we don't play at all. And then we play 3 in a row. We got 5 more matches left, and they'll be challenging. Every one of them is a good club, and we are definitely learning. So
That's good.
trying to get the kids who came this week, which is about a third to probably 40% of our kids came in this week, and
Good.
they got some extra swings and they got some work. We tried a new version of an old drill, not really drill, but a way to play. We've been playing queens and speedball, and after our discussion last week, I decided that I needed a constraint. So we put a box where a good pass should be, and said, okay, if you're playing queens or speedball, if the first pass on serve receive isn't in the box, you're out. And they had to work at that. Did it make progress? I don't know. We'll see. That takes
I don't
time.
know. Always different.
Yeah.
Always difficult.
So tell us about what today's going to bring.
Yeah, so I invited Loren Anderson on. He's been on before. We talked a little about just, as I recall, just finding the joy in volleyball, and he's got some interesting updates in his volleyball coaching career. Some things that we can explore, I think, that are probably helpful to coaches that are running a program or are starting something new. I thought it'd be a good place to kind of explore a couple of questions and thoughts with him there.
Yeah, if you want to look up a word for Loren, look up peripatetic. Not pathetic. Peripatetic. Thank you. Can't even pronounce it. I wound up on
I'm gonna have to look that up.
the best teacher I ever had. Wound up using that word in a test just to yank us around a little bit. He said, "If you can tell me what this means, you get 10 points," and I couldn't. So there you go.
Hey, Loren.
Hello, how are you two doing today?
Good, very good. So where are you? Where are you hanging out now? Where are you living in the moment?
Yeah, right now I'm at Redfish Lake Lodge in just outside of Stanley, Idaho, which is in the Sawtooth Mountains of Stanley, Idaho, of the central Idaho. Nice shirt, by the way, BJ.
Yeah, gotta wear it.
And yeah, so I've been here since early May, doing stuff that has zero to do with volleyball. I've been a bar manager at the lodge here. It's probably my favorite place on earth, and it's been pretty awesome to be able to spend the summer here. And I'm here for one more week.
And then taken off to where? And this is probably the big news. Well, it's not news to your friends, but you're going off to a new volleyball journey.
Yeah, so last little over a year ago, I sold my volleyball club that I'd run for 13, 14 years, and now I'm headed to Marin County, California, just north of San Francisco, to work with a club there. I kind of posted on the Volleyball Coaches and Trainers Forum and a few other places that I was interested in getting back into coaching over the winter, but I needed something that worked around what I'm doing up here, and just kind of put it out there to see what kind of responses I might get. And I did have about 6 different club directors around the country reach out to me, and this was the one that seemed the best fit for me.
That's really cool if you think about it. When I started coaching club, that wasn't something that was even remotely possible. That a person could put out their resume to clubs. I mean, you could go to colleges, obviously, but to be able to find a club and say, "Hey, I'm interested in coaching or running a program. What do you have for me?" And to to hear that you have 6 people just more or less out of the blue, right? I mean, it's almost cold calls that these people are giving you. It's just neat to hear that that's possible.
Yeah, I didn't know. I don't think I've met any of the people that reached out to me before they reached out to me. 2 of them were referrals from that you guys might know him, John Kessel. And but the rest were just people that saw the message and were interested in seeing what I could offer their program and what their program could offer me. So yeah, it is pretty cool. I had never thought of that either. I just did it on a whim. I was kind of like, well, let's see what happens. And now it's led me to have a place to live. I've got a rental in Marin County. I've got a job that I've actually been working for them now for over a month remotely as I'm getting ready to head that way next week.
That's just such a cool story for me. So tell us about this club a little bit. I know we're not here to promote clubs, Steve, but tell us kind of, there's every club in the country, from one team to the huge clubs, which are 50 teams. What's this? What is this club? Where does that fit in that scale?
I'd say they're pretty in a lot of ways, which was the kind of the thing that really tipped the decision for me. Very similar to the club that I ran in Boise, size-wise, philosophy-wise, and then just program-wise, the things that they're offering. Although they are offering beach volleyball, which we never did in Boise, and that was a big plus as well. So I'm going to get a chance to be able to work with the beach players, and that's something I've never, in 30 years of coaching, I've never done. I'm a beach player, but I've never actually coached beach, and I had an opportunity to do that over the winter for a little bit of time in Missouri, of all places, and it was really fun. So I'm glad I get a chance to at least be around that this winter. So
yeah, I'm jealous. I would love to coach beach. It's just it's really hard, here in Wisconsin, even farther north and less light than Missouri.
Yeah. Well, the place, it's an interesting story, but I ended up stopping at a place in Missouri that is the largest indoor beach volleyball facility in the country, and it's the second largest in the world. And of all places, it's in Ozark, Missouri. It's an air-supported structure with 10 beach courts inside. Real sand, like I think 18 to 20 inches deep, not jumper sand. And it was a pretty cool place. What's that?
Like Hermosa or one of the...
Yeah. It was hard to move around in at first when I got there, and it took me a little while to get used to it. And I was pretty much just getting used to it when I ended up headed on my way, following my peripatetic ways. But yeah, so that was but getting that opportunity to work with the kids on the sands was fun, and it kind of made me realize that was something I would enjoy doing. So hopefully I get a chance to do at least a little bit of that while I'm in Marin County. They don't do a lot of the beach stuff in the winter, but I think they do some. So hopefully I'll get a chance to work with them. So Yeah, and then as far as other things about the club that just really drew me to it, one was they're not the kind of club that's out there promoting um, their national championship wins. They're not promoting the college scholarships. As they have kids that do all of that, and they have teams that do all of that, similar to what I did at Rise. That's not the number one priority. The priority is the holistic athlete, recognizing the place that volleyball can play in an athlete's life, but not requiring volleyball to be the athlete's life. And that's always been my philosophy. And so to find a club that is asking me, and I think that's probably part of why they asked me, was they knew. I think the director of the club was familiar with Rise and familiar with my philosophies when he approached me. So it was nice to, I don't know, I wouldn't go so far as to say I felt validated. I just felt honored that somebody felt I had something to offer to their program, especially considering that the director's been at the program. I mean, their program's been around for 30 plus years, and the director's been there for the majority of it. So it's kind of cool that somebody who's been running a program for that long would reach out to basically a stranger and say, I think you have something to add to our program. So that's exciting for me. It's a good challenge.
Yeah,
Hey, it's always
that
great to
does.
be appreciated.
Yeah, there is that part of it too.
Yeah. So part of the reason that I'm having you, that I invited you on, was selfish, of course. I'm in a new program myself. We have, I'm working with a high school where they have 3 girls teams, brand new this year boys team.
Nice.
And yeah, it's exciting. Went to the boys match the other night, and it was just, it was really cool. We actually have a guy that I really think could get recruited. He's good enough. But anyway, just my issue or my thought is delivering the message that you have. You've got an idea of, like you said, evidence-based training. You and I have talked about that for years. With a group of us that are also evidence based, and it's not always a highly accepted way to train because it doesn't follow the norms and standards of the traditions of training on the girls' side. On the boys' side, maybe it's a little different. It's a little bit more game play on their side, but on the girls' side, it's tough to break out of some of the norms of what training should look like because everybody is, we're creatures of habit often, and it's hard to break those habits. So my curiosity is, how do you go about walking into a place and saying, I have some new ideas for you, and let's reconsider everything and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Again, I think I kind of picked this club simply because I don't feel like I'm starting at zero with that approach. I feel like they're at least the director and the assistant director is actually getting, I believe, her master's in motor learning. So you've got someone who's actually interested, 2 people who are very interested in the field. Currently, I think they both approach it more from the information processing side, following Schmidt and the schema themes of motor learning, which is not where I build my philosophies, but it's still a great step in the right direction rather than simply doing what their coaches did or doing what they think is going to work with no evidence. And so I think it's actually something I'm working on right now, because I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach this, because what I've been asked to do is to there's a variety of things that I'm doing for the club, but in this role of actually advising the coaching staff, I've been asked to observe practices without taking part in the practices, and then meet with the coaches afterwards to give them feedback, give them some suggestions to help them. In my eyes, it's helping them become curious enough to explore new ideas. And I ruminated on this for the last 2 months on how do I approach this. And I think what I've settled on, with the help of some great mentors and friends, is that I need to approach it the same way I would approach coaching the kids. If I walked into a gym and watched some kids play and immediately stepped out on the court and said, you need to change this, you need to change that, then not only would I not be effective at coaching, in my opinion, but I'd also not be following my own philosophies of coaching. And so I feel like what I want to do with these coaches is to do the same thing I would do with kids, and that is observe, ask some really great questions that hopefully get them to explore the idea in conversation with me. And then, following the ideas of motivational interviewing, which I think is one of the best things coaches can apply to coaching youth sports, is to have a conversation in which the change becomes their idea and not my idea. And, and that takes a skillful person on my end, I guess, to lead the conversation in that way, to be patient enough. It might not be a one-time thing. It probably won't be. It might be a series of conversations over the entire winter, or maybe it's going to take 2 or 3 winters to get to some of these coaches, as far as how to get them to engage in that conversation and to recognize that there are other options than what they're doing. I think so. That's kind of where I'm coming at it from. What I'm planning on doing is building a structure around it, and that I will present to the coaches, the club itself, where I'm coming from, what my philosophies are, what my principles are, the main keys, so that when I am suggesting changes or asking questions to guide them towards change, they know where I'm coming from, and it's not just things they've never heard of before, because some of these coaches might not have heard of some of these concepts that are encapsulated in the constraints-led approach, or ecological dynamics, or even motor learning and schema theory things. The concept of transfer is not well understood by a lot of coaches. And while the two theories, whether it be the schema theory or the ecological dynamics and CLA side, their idea of what transfer is different. I don't think people really understand either very well. And so helping them understand those things, and then hopefully being a resource for them to have a conversation with, where it's not their job on the line. If you're a coach and you're going to your director with questions where maybe you're questioning what your director wants you to do, or you're questioning the club's philosophies, you're towing a line, and it takes a very courageous person, I think, to step into that conversation. But if they come to me, who I have no power or no relevance whatsoever to their continued job as a coach at this club, we can have a great conversation that I think will allow them to be more open about their concerns or their questions or their beliefs when it comes to coaching. So,
Loren, I got a question for you. Can you, and this is a big ask, But could you walk through? You just illuminated 4 things that Schmidts Approach, all of those different pieces. If you could just do a quick definition for, assume I've never heard of, I right now I know enough to be dangerous. Some of our listeners probably will not know anything about this, and maybe just walk us through that briefly to kind of get a base for us to make, set up our discussion going forward.
Whew, I didn't come prepared for that, but I'll see what I can do. If anybody who knows Schmidt's work and follows it ends up listening to this, and just forgive me if I completely trash it.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
Harjeev will get in on this and leave a couple of comments.
There you go.
Yeah. I would say that the I'm going to rely on Rob Gray's work for this. Rob Gray is the guy who runs the Perception and Action podcast. He's a professor at Arizona State University, and he's probably one of the more knowledgeable people that I've found when it comes to translating the science speak to things that people can understand. And he actually has some videos. He did some podcasts, but he does a lot of times when he does a podcast, he does it on YouTube so he can show things, and then he'll put it out on his podcast as just audio. But you can also go and watch the things that he's demonstrating on screen. And he's got a 2-part thing on YouTube about how to apply the ecological dynamics to coaching and learning in volleyball specifically. He did the presentation for the Arizona region. Our friend Eric Hodges got him on board and did a presentation for them. I'm sorry I missed it. It was actually the very beginning of my trip last winter, and I was on the other side of the country. But I've watched the videos quite a few times because they've really helped me find the right words to describe what I want to be able to describe to people. So to answer your question, I mean, he breaks it down into variability. He starts with variability. So if we think about the goal of what we're trying to do, so let's just take something as simple as serving. It doesn't matter which approach you take, whether it be the information processing or the ecological dynamics approach. The goal is to reduce the variability of the outcome of your action. So if I'm serving, what we want a kid to be able to learn how to do is to reduce the variability of the outcome, right? So if they're trying to serve to area 6, the goal is to have them serve to area 6 10 out of 10 times, or 100 out of 100 times. That's the goal of coaching. As a team, if we're working to get a good pass and a good set to our outside hitter and have her get a kill, we want that to happen 100 out of 100 times. That's reducing the variability of the outcome. And that's agreed upon no matter which theory or which approach you take to this. What's not agreed upon is the method, of how to get there. In the information processing approach, if we want to reduce the variability of the outcome, we reduce the variability of the method. We reduce variability in practice. We isolate things to reduce variability so that they can repeat the same movement over and over and over again and ingrain it as a motor pattern. And by reducing the variability of their movement, we have then reduced the variability of the outcome. So that's really to me, the most basic understanding of what the information processing concepts or that theory, pardon me, that theory would be. And then if we look at it from the ecological dynamics side, it's pretty much the opposite. We see, to reduce variability in the outcome, we want to increase the variability of movement, increase the variability of practice, so that the player has the opportunity to explore their limits, explore their range, and learns how to get the same result, but through a variety of different movements and actions. And as a team, we want to get the same result through a variety of different movements and actions. And obviously, there's a limit to the amount of variability we want. I mean, the ecological dynamics is not saying, let's play basketball so that we can get good at serving a volleyball. That is variability. Like if you showed up at practice and the coach was like, we're going to play basketball today, that's massive variability. But there is, and so within both ideas, there is that concept of transfer. Within the information processing theory, there is the transfer is what's transferring is the actual motor pattern, the movement that has been created through repetition for repetition's sake. If I want to be a great server, I have to have the exact same toss, the exact same swing every time. And then if I can do that, that then transfers to the game. If I'm in serve receive, and what I want to have transfer is the motor pattern that has become ingrained in my body, and that will then transfer to the game. This one's a work in progress for me, but in the ecological dynamics side, what transfers is not the movement, not the body action, but the attunement to the information that's necessary to make to make a movement. There is no right movement. It's the movement that works based on what you are perceiving. And so what we want to have in both theories, transfer is really important, and it is specific. I heard that about 7,000 times in the first month I met John Kessel, was transfer is specific. And that was very much an information processing concept, because it was based on the idea that if the way I'm moving in practice is going to transfer to the game. Whereas in the ecological dynamics side, the concept is I need to create an environment that is as similar as possible to the game, so that what I am perceiving and what I'm learning from what I'm perceiving then is what's going to transfer. Not really my movements, because we want and we recognize the need for variability of movement. And that's why I like this approach, because it makes sense to most coaches, at least on the surface level. If you told a coach, can a player develop the exact same footwork, the exact same jump, the exact same arm swing, and apply that 100% of the time in a game? Anybody who's ever been around volleyball is going to say, no, you have to adjust. So, or adapt. And that's maybe my third point coming from Rob, which I really like, is that the whole point of the repetitions that we do in practice in the information processing style is that we are building that motor pattern in an isolated environment, devoid of context. And then we slowly bring in the context to make it more complex. And we teach the athlete how to adjust the motor pattern they've created to each one of those individual new situations. So that coach who starts by just tossing a ball to a player to teach them how to pass a ball, and then as they learn the motor pattern, they start to vary where they're tossing the ball to make it more complex, more game-like, I guess, is their theory. But my question in that is, there's an infinite amount of ways a ball can come to a player. Are you going to go through all of those infinite amounts with them before you actually allow them to play? because that's what that linear information processing approach seems to suggest, is that we have to present them with every possible scenario for them to be able to learn how to respond to it. Whereas the ecological dynamics side suggests that the role of creating variability in practice is to emphasize adaptability, not adjustability. So we're not trying to adjust a motor pattern to the situation in the moment. We are adapting to the situation in the moment, and we know through having been exposed to lots of variability in our practice how to change what we're doing. We're going to have a different arm swing. We're going to pass the ball differently. We're going to serve differently. I mean, you look at that kid who, unless their toss is perfect, they bury the ball into the bottom of the net. And then you have that kid who can have the most atrocious toss, and you're wincing on the sideline as their coach, yet they figure out how to get the ball over and turn it into a good serve. That's a kid who's learned to adapt. They had to change their entire arm swing. They had to change their entire everything. Hitters, you see those great hitters. I mean, you see it a lot with kids who come from the beach and play indoor, because they know how to adapt. They adapt to wind, they adapt to sun, they adapt to the sand. And now they're indoor and they're very adaptable. They're not adjusting an ingrained motor pattern. They're adapting to the situation and using a movement that works in that moment. It might be a movement you won't see them make again for 3 weeks, but it worked in that moment. So I think that, to me, those are the keys. Like, how do we approach variability? How do we approach transfer? And are we trying to create adaptability or adjustability? Those, to me, are the keys that differentiate the two approaches. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of
agree.
sense. One of the questions. Go ahead, BJ.
Go ahead.
So one of the questions for me is, when you think about, we're going to get this right. Sorry, BJ. So one of the questions I have is, take setting, okay, and basic kind of setting footwork. So I did a video 12, 13 years ago with a setter from Ohio State who did some nice demos of what she was taught, and footwork patterns and footwork drills. Okay, very drill based, but well intended. And what I've noticed and I'm a walk-in JV coach for a program that's got I'd say below average skill level, and watching our setters set and watching their footwork, which is all over the place. Trying to figure out where you use kind of the good, I'll say good footwork, because there's no perfect footwork, but the idea of, okay, it's a good thing to, plant your right heel and roll onto your right toe as you're setting, if you're not jump setting, for example. And where that's not happening, where they're jumping backwards and taking all the kind of power out of it, how to start with that and then do variability. Because what I've noticed this year, which I like, we spent a lot of time doing queens and twos and all the things we advocate for. But what that's led to is not developing the abilities to run a standard, the offense that we want to run, but we scrambled really well. The problem is that at the end of our scrambles, it's usually a free ball somewhere on their side, which they come and beat, down our throat. So again, it's not just solely due to that, but how to, get across some of the more efficient or effective mechanics that then you can riff off of. It's kind of like learning an instrument when you start kind of in a classical form and then are able to do jazz later because you've built the base. How do you reconcile those? Or maybe they don't need to be reconciled, but how do you move in those directions?
Well, one, I think comparing learning volleyball to learning an instrument is wrong, because instrument is it's not a complex environment. It is a complicated environment. There is no unknown, right? It's you playing the instrument. And if you follow the right pattern, you get the results you want every single time. Input equals output when playing a musical instrument. in a complex system, like, and the other thing I like to talk to people about, how a lot of coaches refer to, they coach as if the player in front of them was a Rube Goldberg machine. And you guys know what that is, right? That's you hit a domino and it hits a bowling ball and hits a, whatever, and these things go forever. One of my favorites is there's a band called OK Go, and they have a song called This Too Shall Pass. And it's, the entire video is a Rube Goldberg machine that they took like 675 takes to get it right. So that means they filmed their video 675 times with the singing and everything, and they had to film it 675 times before they got it right. And I thought that was that's one of my favorite videos. But that Rube Goldberg machine is a complicated system. If one part of it doesn't work, you go in and you fix that one part, and then you go again until something else doesn't work, and then you fix that one part. So the input hitting that first domino, when the machine works perfectly, the input hitting that first domino always equals the output, that very end, balloons flying into the sky. In a complex system, which human beings are, and teams of human beings are, the same input will almost never equal the same output. So equating playing a musical instrument and the steps needed to learn to play a musical instrument which is a complicated system, to the complex system of learning to play volleyball and learning to play with teammates, it doesn't jive for me, because I could spend 4 years teaching a kid the perfect footwork for, someone's idea of perfect footwork for setting, and that setter might still be terrible because they don't put the ball where it needs to be. And that's my approach is, if we think about it, there was a time in the history of teaching volleyball where we didn't have any concepts of what good footwork for setting were. How did we come up with those concepts? Who derived those concepts? Well, my thought is somebody watched a kid or an adult, a college player or a professional player, setting really, really well, and said, you know what? It's got to be how they move their feet. Watch how that person moves their feet. I'm going to teach my players to move my feet like that, because that's clearly related to how well this setter sets. And there's certainly correlation, but I don't believe there's causation there. So, how do we, this is a question I've been trying to engage with a lot of people lately, is how do we determine what is a good technique? What defines a good technique? And everybody that I've had this conversation with lately seems to agree on the surface that really the outcome defines whether it was a good technique or not. Right? So if your setter does all the great footwork that you've taught them, and then they set the ball poorly, what do most coaches blame? The technique somewhere, right? So even if on the surface they did everything right, or as you've taught them, and then they get the wrong outcome, something in there was still wrong or needs to be fixed. And that's like that's my least favorite word in all of coaching is fixed. That person needs to be fixed. That technique needs to be fixed. Nothing here is broken. It's a flower doesn't need to be fixed because it's not blooming. It needs a little more time, fertilizer, sunshine, and water. It doesn't need to be fixed. And that's the difference between a complex system and a complicated system. Complex systems, you don't get the same outcome even when you put in the same input. So you could have all the right footwork, all the right hand movement, and still get a set that goes in the wrong direction, or is off, or is a double, or is too low or too high. So I guess to answer your question, long-winded answer, but to answer your question as far as how I treat that or how I look at that, I think that outcome affects, or the outcome should drive the technique rather than the other way around, right? So start with the outcome. with a beginner who's never set before. Instead of saying, let's go do footwork, let's go figure out how to hold our hands, it's let's play a game, probably doubles, because we want them to get as many touches as possible. And here's where you need, here's the ideal place to set the ball. Or even better, why don't you ask your partner where the ideal place to set the ball is for her or for him? Because it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is, does that player, does the person you're setting actually think that's an ideal? And let's just set the ball there. And so, like, you know, with beginners in my old club at Rise, we would play a game called, we played two different games to try to ingrain this, or not ingrain, that's a bad word, to explore this. And that would be, you know, like, we're going to catch the first contact, that Swedish smash ball game, whereas balls served over, we're going to catch the first ball and let my partner move to the net, toss the ball to them, and then have them set, and I'm going to go attack it. So now they're getting a more, and that's the other concept that I didn't hit when I came to the difference between the IP approach and the ecological dynamics approach, is this idea of, in the information processing approach, to fix something, you deconstruct the game. You remove parts of it to work on them, and then you put them back together and believe that they're going to synergize. Whereas in the ecological dynamics approach, rather than deconstruct and remove from the context, we simplify the game. We remove layers of complexity, but we leave in all the relevant perceptual information. We leave in the opportunity for attunement. We leave in the opportunity for, we must also leave in the goal, the outcome that we're searching for, because we want the goal to drive the movement, not the movement to drive the goal. So I think a lot of coaches approach teaching all the skills, the so-called fundamentals of volleyball, in the sense that the movement's going to drive the goal. If we can teach them to do their footwork right, if we can teach them to swing their arm right, they're going to get the outcome that we want. I come at it from the other side. Here's the outcome that we want. Go and explore ways to do that, and I'm going to be here to help guide you, to ask questions, to answer your questions, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it, because I want you to have the ability to explore the various means, various variability of achieving this goal, because we can achieve any goal in volleyball. Any outcome in volleyball can be achieved through countless different ways. We as a volleyball coaching community, I think, have done a very big service, and I'm going to include myself in that for sure. We've done a big disservice to our athletes for many years to say there's a very few ways to achieve the outcome that we need. And instead of opening it up and saying, here's the goal, go figure out how to achieve it. And that doesn't mean we're not teaching, right? That doesn't mean we're saying, go do this, and then we're going to step back and watch. We are still teaching, but we're not demanding compliance with our ideas. We are encouraging curiosity and exploration, and then we are co-creating with them. We are letting them lead the exploration, the search for a viable solution to the problem, and we're there to help guide them through that process, rather than saying, this is what works, do it. And if it doesn't work, try listening to what the coach said the first time.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, borrowing from non-directional coaching for, leadership coaching, executive coaching, which I do in the other part of my world. There's the idea of an offering. A coach will make an offer. The International Coaching Federation will tell you not to even do that very much. But my experience with my clients is they benefit and desire that offering. And that offering is a suggestion about how to go about something, as opposed to you must do it this way. And I think for me, that's where I struggle a little bit, going I'll even go back to the concept of complex and complicated. I would tell you that jazz is complex. I would not, and so I don't want to beat on that too much. But the world, a jazz performance is never the same twice, and it requires
No, I
that whole
100%
thing.
agree with you.
So we're okay there. I'd say in a very strict sense, there's a definite difference. But I think the fun part about it is, okay, where do you make the suggestion, and then how do you experiment? Because in design work, if you're teaching design methods, the first thing is to observe the need, and that's the need of the customer or whatever. So that equates to your outcome. You know, you want you score on the other team. I love it when a friend of mine's son was criticized by all the other guys and you know on the boards. This goes back a decade or so, and all the guys were giving him grief because he didn't hit hard, and it was he's like, yeah, I just score. And so he was, you know, he said, how do I do that? Well, I just find ways to tool you or do all the things they need to do. And he was a great scorer. And I think that's giving them that offer of here's the outcome we want, but also offering them techniques. And I agree with you. My most effective server of the last 20 years had the most god awful. I tried to teach her the torque serve. She couldn't quite get there. She served semi side, kind of in between underhand and torque serve, and hit the ball half the time off of her wrist and killed people because she could put the ball anywhere she wanted. I'm not so sure she wanted to put it there. Maybe it was because it was so random the other team couldn't deal with it. But regardless, she beat, she was on a very low level team, and we would go play the top club team, and they would have trouble receiving serve. Why? Because it was different, and because she was
Yep.
good at it. So I hear you. Then it's figuring out, okay, if you see mechanical things that are limiting a person from getting the chain of that generates power for setting,
Sure.
offering that as a suggestion, here's a way to start thinking about it, and then let them explore, for me, seems to be a little more helpful at the early stages of somebody learning the sport. I'd be interested in your reaction to that.
No, I
Oh,
agree. I mean, that is part of what we want to do. Sorry, DJ, go ahead. You go first.
No, you go.
Well, I agree. I think we do want to be able to offer suggestions because we're co-creating this. So we want to say, here's what's worked for other people. Here's what's worked for me. Here's what's worked for other girls or boys in the club program, or show them video of someone else, like show them videos of some of the international or college players and say, here's how they're solving that problem, right? So if we're looking at a kid who's got, what we, and that's the other side of it too, is, I guess, but okay, I won't touch on that right away. But I think that, let's say we're looking at a kid who's hitting and we're worried that the way she's swinging at the ball is either going to be ineffective, less effective, or possibly cause long-term injury, right? And so we're asking her to change, or she can't hit the ball hard and she wants to hit the ball hard. That's what she wants to do. And so she's coming to us saying, how do I hit the ball harder? And so we can offer examples to her. We can show her players. We can show her someone like Gabby on the Brazilian team. We can show her someone like Annie Drews on the U.S. women's team. These people who they're going to bust open a ball one of these times. They hit it so hard. We can show them, if it's a guy, we can show them, you got your pick of hundreds of guys at the international level. You can show them, show them a Matt Anderson, show them a Leon, show them, a Bartov Kurek. And so I think that's a great way to offer the suggestion, because instead of saying, I have a belief and I'm going to tell you my belief, it becomes, I want to show you something. Let's explore this together. I'm going to show you people who are doing what you want to be able to do. And I think it's important that you show them a variety, right? So if you show them Gabby, you show them Annie Drews, you show them Britt, what is her last name on the Belgian team, who I think is one of the most dynamic women hitters in the world right now. They all hit the ball differently. They all have a different way of moving their body to attack the ball. And I think that's important because that shows, and that point that out to the player. Like, these are some different solutions people have come up with. But let's see if you can find something in there that you'd like to explore. Same with setters. I mean, you'll find within the women's game alone, you'll find probably 6 or 7 different ways the setters set the ball, 7 or 8 different ways they move to the ball. And, probably at least 3 or 4 different ways they release the ball. And they're all successful. That was the real big kicker for me when I first started looking for something different, something that made more sense to me, was when I started watching like really great college teams, and obviously our national team and other international teams. Was you watch Penn State, you watch, I haven't actually had a chance to watch any college volleyball this year, so I don't know who's like considered good this year. I don't get a good enough internet connection up here to watch it, but you look any of the perennial powerhouses in women's volleyball, and you watch, let's say they have 2 outside hitters on their team, watch both of them. I can guarantee they don't hit the ball the same way. They may have similarities, but when you really watch closely, there is going to be a difference. There's going to be a difference in the way they draw their elbow back. There's going to be a difference in the way they do their footwork. There's going to be a difference in the way they follow through. And you watch one of them throughout the course of a match, and I guarantee she's going to look differently on multiple occasions. So if these are the best players in the world, or at least in college volleyball in the United States, and they have this massive level of variability in the way that they're doing things, why are we requiring players to follow one set way of doing things when we know that they're going to have to be able to adapt their movement patterns, their mechanics, to use that word, later, to be able to, that's, to me, it's not that they are great players and so therefore they are afforded the opportunity to do different things. They did different things. They had a variety. I mean, that's something I've heard for ever since coaching. The best hitters are the coaches that have range, right? Well, what is that range? That range is adaptability. It's perceiving the situation in front of them and adapting their footwork, their swing, based on what they see in front of them so that they can score a point. So what's driving that adaptability? Their desire, their intent for the outcome, right? So, I just think that I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question, but
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
is kind of where I come from on it.
No, it really helps.
And I'm not saying, well, I just wanted to add, like, I'm not saying that we don't tell setters that there's good ways to move, right? But I think we can get there. I think you can get a setter to do those things without telling them exactly how to move their feet. I think you can have principles of movement, like stay balanced, move quick, be stopped before you set the ball. Things that are more principle-based rather than prescriptive movement patterns. Take a right, left, right, and then set the ball.
Yeah,
I'm just going to tell a setter, be balanced. Be balanced, move quick. Small steps might be better than big. And, follow through the ball. Something like that, where, not only follow through with your hands, but follow through with your body to address the point of you're talking about the what I call the boot scoot set, where they set the ball and their whole back end goes backwards instead of forwards. I think that you can get to all of that without telling them to focus on body parts and how their feet are moving or how their butt's moving or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of science that shows that when we create an internal focus like that, we're actually slowing down the learning process and slowing down the messages being sent from the central nervous system to the muscles. And if we can create external focus and analogies for them to be thinking about instead of focusing on body parts, we're actually going to speed up the learning process and speed up the message that's being sent, so that they're going to perform the action more fluidly and less clunky, right? So.
Yeah. No, I think the concept, to borrow from design, one of the things we talk about a lot is in complex systems, there are no bests and worsts. There are good and better and not so good. And those are the things that you can kind of, suggest and say, look, there are lots of different ways. I mean, I always go back, because I'm old. I go back to Dick Fosbury and go, okay, when that happened, everybody thought he was from Mars. And he kind of was in some respects. But I mean, it was a beautiful thing to say, hey, I don't need to go over face down. Why would I need to do that?
Right.
So there are opportunities for breakthroughs when you play with this stuff and you try new things. And I was talking to my setter and I said, we've run a lefty offense in the past, and it's kind of interesting to have the setter set in the other direction from 3 on the net and see what happens. And he just looked at me and goes, well, if we're doing that, I'm not playing for you. And I'm like, well, one, I probably won't do that. 2, even if I did do that, that's not a great, that's a great answer, because that means you'll be on the bench.
Right.
We want to play, and we won't probably play with that specific concept. But, to your point, well, why do we try to put the setter where we put him? Because if you watch the best teams in the world, the setter's never there. I mean, they're somewhere else. So figuring out how to play from somewhere else is a fun thing. But this has been really helpful in terms of trying to. I think one of the challenge for coaches is then, okay, take these concepts and figure out how you're going to run a game. A game with some sort of constraints, which is why this week we put the box there to say, okay, if you want to play queens and you like to play queens, if you don't pass in that box on serve receive, you don't get to play anymore. Go, next team comes through, and start working on putting it in the box so that we can at least, and the box is pretty big, but it gives us a chance to run an offense. And that's kind of what we wanted to do. But finding ways like that to do it, because coaches are always looking for what do I do? And how do I do it?
I think it's important to note that everything that a coach does in practice, every choice they make is a constraint, right? It doesn't matter what your beliefs are about coaching. If you're the isolated coach who, has blockers on boxes while you're hitting at them just so that they can learn how to move their hands, if you're putting a coach on a box to hit to a defensive player over and over and over again, these are all constraints. They're just overly constraining, in my opinion, because you've created an environment that doesn't have the context in which they need to perceive in order to move. If we're taking away the perception, then we're not really teaching them. We're teaching them to move in a pre-scripted way instead of moving in reaction to the environment around them. Right? I had a conversation the other day with Sarah Stratton, who was Australian Olympic beach volleyball player who's working with a club down in Southern California now. We've had some conversations just like this on multiple occasions, and I was trying to create an analogy for her to understand that concept. And I came up with the idea of, like, if you had a 4-year-old kid who you needed to teach how to cross the street. Maybe it's a busy street by your house and you need to teach the kid how to cross the street by themselves so they can get to their friend's house. Would you pre-script their movement pattern? Right? Like, would you say, okay, take 3 steps forward and then 2 steps to your right and then wait for 3 seconds and then move forward? No, because you would be like, they're going to get nailed by a car because they have to learn to see the cars. So what you're going to teach them is what to look at, right? You need to look left. You need to look right. Do you see a car? Don't go, right? You don't just say, well, we're going to move like this and then move like this. Oh, and then when you see a car move like this, well, are you sure that's going to work? Like you don't teach a kid to cross the street by giving them prescripted movement patterns. You teach a kid to cross the street by teaching them what to look at and what to do based on what they're looking at. And eventually you get to a point, or you don't teach them anything and you grab their hand and walk them across, which is what a lot of coaches do. They don't teach anybody anything. I'm sorry, maybe not a lot, but there's definitely enough coaches out there who don't teach anybody anything. They just constantly tell them what to do. And so then you've got these players who don't have any knowledge about actually what to do in complex situations. They just need the coach to tell them what to do all the time. And, you know, that's not going to work for your kid who you're teaching to cross the street, because at some point in time, that kid needs to learn to do it on their own, or your whole day is going to be spent taking your kid back and forth across the street. So, you know, so that's, I just think it's, you know, important to understand what we're trying to create when we're trying to do this with these kids. You know, do we want the kids to always be reliant on the coach, or can we create an environment that allows them to learn in a way that their reliance on the coach decreases for a lot of the things, and then the coach can do the one or two important things that only the coach really understands, which is maybe the complex tactical applications, you know. So, and then let the kids work on and figure out the movements and the solutions to the problems and those kind of things. So I don't feel like I answered your question though, but
no, I think you did very, very much so. And I think it's one of those things where we as coaches need to kind of wrestle with this a little bit. And you know, the outcomes for coaches are interesting, because parents come in with an outcome of, why aren't you barking at my children? Why aren't you telling them what to do and where to be? Somebody didn't get to that ball. Why aren't you telling them they should have done that? And it's kind of like, because they need to figure it out for themselves. And then they go, well, then what are you here for? I'm like, because, you know, if you go on a fishing trip, right? You take a guide. Is the guide sitting there and telling you every little thing to do while you're fishing? I don't think so. They're making sure you got a good starting point. They take you to places where you're likely to be successful, and then they let you experience it. That's more of what my coaching's become. You know, I'll be sitting there watching for 15 minutes, watching them play doubles and seeing what they're doing, and maybe I take somebody off and suggest something. You know, and I think the other thing I run into a lot is kids get into this mindset. I cannot get kids to torque serve, even though I know they'll be more successful, and I know the weight shifting and the motions translate better to overhand serving ultimately, because they will get there. And so I watch teams constantly and that are not going to be successful because they keep trying to overhand serve 15 feet off the net because they can't get there yet. And a lot of it's peer pressure or their perception, which is another problem for coaches that we don't have much control over. But, you know, finding ways then to maybe infect parents with these ideas, talk about next gen stuff. Parents looking for coaches who teach like this because it's better for their kids. You know, we've got a long way to go, but this has been a real help, for, at least for me, to go back and think more about how I let them experience the environment more.
Yeah, to your point about the parenting thing, that was the great connecting piece between having these conversations with Sarah, because that's where her specialty is. She's done these parenting. She's gone to school as a parent education, like not for sports, but just for how to be a better parent. And she's bringing it to sports. And so she's looking at, talking to parents about how to be better sports parents, but at the same time, also recognizing the parallel between being a great parent and being a great coach. And, one of the goals of being a great parent is that you eventually want to be able to say, you don't need me anymore, and you can go on and do these things without me. But you don't teach a kid to make those great decisions and to to learn like that without actually giving them an opportunity to make bad decisions and to learn from those. And, I think we as coaches a lot of times put the match outcome, the W or the L, before the learning outcome for the individual athletes in our care. And it can mean that we're going to lose more at times if we're really bought into developing our players and helping them learn, because we've got to give them the opportunity to do things on their own and learn from them.
Yeah.
And if we don't, then they're going to always be relying on the coach. And, and that's created an entire youth sports model in which the coach is the sought after expert, right?
Right.
Kids jump clubs because they want to play for this specific coach. And it's not that coach is actually sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not that coach is actually a great teacher. It's that coach produces wins through their methods of directing and explicit coaching, which means that the kids don't have to work as hard to learn. And that's the other side of it. A lot of kids really struggle to be in that environment where they are being held accountable to learn. They just want the answers, They want to come to a coach and say, can't serve over, put your elbow higher, which, the fact that anybody could give such a simple answer to such a complex problem and actually feel like that's the right answer it baffles me. There's so much involved in serving the ball over the net that you can just look at a player and say, oh, your elbow needs to be higher. When I can point out 7,000 volleyball players in the world who serve over constantly with a low elbow. Like it has nothing to do with the elbow, but they give them an answer. So then that makes the kid feel, oh, I'm confident now because I have the answer. And they're willing to go out and work on it more than if the coach says, well, why don't you go just work on it a little while and why don't you come and tell me what you think you're doing wrong? That kid's going to be like frustrated. They're going to be like, oh, the coach didn't want to give me an answer. I told the story a million times about my dad when I was young. I had some sort of vocabulary thing I had to do for school. And I went to my dad, who's a certified genius. And he's one of the smartest, or if not the smartest human being I've ever met in my life. And I went to him knowing how smart he is. And I said, Dad, what does this word mean? And he's like, come here, I'll show you. Took me into his little den, his little office in the house, walked over and took a dictionary off the wall, handed it to me, and he said, I'm pretty sure the answer is in there. And I was so mad. I think I was like 11, and I was so mad. But the lesson he taught me was amazing, and it's a lesson that I've held on to my entire life, is I can find the answers that I need to almost everything. And it's about finding the right resource, right? And it's not like, and that's something I think we have a responsibility to teach these kids, is the answers are in that 900 square feet more often than not.
Yeah.
Is that the right? And the coach is outside of that 900 square feet. And I would bet 90% of the answers a kid seeks are inside of that 900 square feet. And if they learned to actually pay attention to their teammates, to the opponent more, that they would have their own answers, and they wouldn't need to be turned into the coach all the time for answers. And then that allows the coach to be a better observer, which then allows them to see trends better. Instead, a lot of coaches, because the kids so need our feedback, we become reactive coaches, where we're giving feedback every single play, every single action. And it's never really well thought out feedback. It's just reactive feedback. And instead, if we can just have that opportunity to observe, because we trust our players to be solving problems on their own, then we could start to see trends. And then we could say, you know what? I've noticed that Sally, almost every time she hits the ball, she's doing it in a way that I'm really uncomfortable about her shoulder health. So now I can actually have a good conversation with her about it, instead of a one-off, like, oh gosh, she hit it like that, man. I got to talk to her about that in practice, because she's going to hurt herself, when it's maybe 1 out of 30 and it was really the only way to attack the ball in that moment and score. That's not going to destroy her shoulder. But if she's doing it, and so I think when we're looking for trends, and we have to have space to do that. I mean, BJ taught me one of my best skills, which is watch the game and write down everything that you want to say in that moment. Don't say it, just write it down. And then later review it and see how much of that is actually important to say to the kids on your team. And what I found was probably 80% of it I could throw away because it wasn't really important. And, and then I stuck to the 20%. And those are the things I took into practice to review with the players. But you don't have that space to do that observation and writing and what I think is true coaching, unless you've created a culture in which your players feel like they can explore things on their own and they don't need you constantly giving feedback from the sideline.
Yeah, and I think so here's an experience from teaching design approaches to problems, to complex problems, to students in an engineering school. Almost inevitably, our school required people to come in and take these interdisciplinary courses, which they had to take 2 semesters. And the engineers would come in and be really frustrated for at least the first half of the course, if not longer, because they were looking for the right answers, because in their field there was an answer. And one of the things as coaches that I think we might not have hit on enough here is that you also need to train the kids to be able to deal with that they are used to getting the answer, which is why they're looking for the answer. So we should expect that there'll be some frustration on their part, and because they're learning to learn as we're letting them do this.
Yes.
And it's like when I use video. First little bit we use video, they come there because the coach will stand there and kind of point out a few things to think about. And I think they need to learn to coach themselves through watching video, because they go through this second phase where they just keep ignoring it because it's not giving them an answer, as opposed to them trying to solve and get better. So we need to be patient with that. And I think the other thing I use all the time with my clients on the business side is think of yourself as that guide. And I have this picture that I talked about. Hey, if they're wandering around in the woods, if they trip over a rock or bump into a tree, that's okay. As a coach, if they're about to walk off a cliff, that's our time to intervene. If they're about to hurt themselves with a technique, they're going to injure a shoulder, that's when we intervene, because we need to protect them. And they're walking out in front of a car. We're teaching them to cross the street. We're not going to let them walk in front of a car. All those things. But beyond that, putting them in an environment where they can explore, and then teaching them how to be in that environment too, so they can learn how to learn that, is something we can miss in this approach if we don't think about their preparation and their level of ability, or level of skill in using these tools.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I loved your analogy about the hiking thing. That was a big one that was presented to me by Stuart Armstrong, who's the host of the Talent Equation podcast. He in one of our first conversations, he likened coaching to the idea that you as a coach live on an island, and when players come into your gym, they are visiting the island for the first time, and you as a coach know where the tigers are and the dangerous snakes and the quicksand and the cliffs. You also know where the beautiful beaches are and the amazing watering hole or whatever, the good and the bad. But when they show up, if you just hand them a map that shows all those things on it, they don't really get to experience the island. Part of experiencing that is exploring and finding it for yourself, rather than having somebody say, hey, I'm going to go take you to the beautiful waterfall, and they take you there and you're like, oh, it's beautiful, cool, what's next? Instead of go explore over there, go for a hike up in that area, and then you come across that waterfall and you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder if anybody's ever seen this before, like it's just more powerful for you. And then if you notice that they're walking down the path that leads to the tigers, you can kind of step in and be like, hey, you might want to not go down this way unless you're prepared, unless you have the tools to handle what's ahead of you. And I think that's to me just a really great analogy about what we're trying to do as coaches, more than I think I don't know, I guess I'll just come out and say it. I think we spend way too much time in coaching worried about mechanics and worried about proper movement. And we should spend a lot more time encouraging players to explore and be curious and learn how to learn, as you put it. And if we spent more time on those, I think we would have way more adaptable players that could, and we'd have a lot less players, ultimately, very possibly a lot less players quit. Or not move on with the sport because they would find more joy in the sport. I mean, which situation are you going to find more joy in? The one in which the coach says, do it my way or the highway, or the situation in which the coach says, let's go explore this together and let's go have some fun. So.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that these are not new ideas. They go back probably 100 years or more. The great golf teacher Harvey Penick, which, Loren, I've pointed you towards him a whole bunch of times. His first lesson is he gives a player a set of golf clubs and says, come back and see me 6 months from now. So he just invites them to explore. And one of the things that he says about players, which I find interesting, is you never want to play against somebody with a bad swing. If somebody has a good swing, they've been to a coach, they've been schooled in the exact right way to swing their club. But if somebody is an advanced player that has a bad swing, they've learned how to groove their faults. Like, they know how to deal with everything that they're doing wrong. And I didn't know it until much later. But it's the same idea as Bernstein's hammer. Bernstein when was that? In the 20s, right? 1920s. He's measuring how blacksmiths are hitting their anvil, and their swing is different every time, but they always hit the same place. So if you can, now both of those movements are rote movements, or they're not complex movements. But if you can take that and apply that to volleyball, to having, if you have to have that amount of flexibility in a very predictable movement, you have to have way more range in a movement that's complex, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's just part of the way our bodies work, and the fact that the human body's always looking for a more efficient and better way to move doing the same thing. I mean, they've done studies where they have somebody sitting in a chair and pick up a water glass off of a table, and they've measured how the muscles move, how the signals move, to show that you can't even do a simple task like that exactly the same way every time. There are huge differences all the way, and at times, and minute differences at times, from just reaching out, picking up a water glass off of a table, because your body is constantly exploring ideas of how to make that movement more efficient and to spend less. I mean, their body's always trying to figure out, how can I do this thing with less energy and get the same result? And so, if you can't be a blacksmith hitting an anvil, or somebody just picking up a water glass, or swinging a golf club the same exact way every single time, then how would we expect a player to do the same in any situation in volleyball? I mean, even the simplest, which is serving, which people say is a closed activity, but I don't buy that, because I mean, if you're serving at an open net with nobody on the other side of the net, it could be a closed motor activity. But when you've got opponents, it's always an open activity, because where you serve and what you're doing with your serve should always be a reaction to what you see on the other side of the net. And what you see on the other side of the net is always going to be different. So it's still, in my opinion, the serve is just as complex and open of an activity as anything else we do on the court. It's just that we're tossing the ball to ourselves. So there's a little bit more of it's simpler, but that doesn't mean it's now a complicated activity instead of a complex activity. It's still complex. And so, to your point, I just think it's Rob Gray mentioned in the videos that I was talking about earlier that, if you look at it from an information processing standpoint, what we're asking someone to do when they're, say, serving a volleyball, I don't know the numbers, maybe you guys do, but think about how many muscles we have in our body, how many bones we have in our body. What we're saying is that if we truly believe in the motor program idea, that we are creating a program for every single muscle in our body when we serve, because every muscle in your body is involved in some degree or another. And so the information processing motor program idea says that there's a different program for every muscle. It's not like one overall program that incorporates all the muscles. It's a different program. So, random number, it's not right. Let's say there was 400 muscles in our body. That means that you've got 400 different motor programs that all have to run simultaneously in the exact same way every single time you serve. I mean, that idea is it's pretty absurd to think that that's actually what's happening, that our brain is controlling that like that. No, what our brain is doing is it's perceiving what the goal is, and then letting the body self-adjust, self-regulate to achieve the goal. And it's going to explore different things, and it's going to find right answers and wrong answers, and slowly but surely narrow down how many right answers there are. And I guess that's maybe my final point on this, is that idea that when you do coach in this manner, in my experience, you get players who look just like the players who were coached via technique and via motor programming ideas. Because there's only so many ways to successfully attack a volleyball down the line past two blockers. There's an infinite amount of choices, but there's only so many that are going to be successful. And so if you allow them to explore and find those successful solutions, they're going to end up, a lot of them are going to end up looking like the one that was taught specifically how to move their elbow and their arm and their hand. And I guess I'm one of those. Like, that's where a lot of this came from. I've never been coached in this sport. I've never had anybody tell me how to move the right way to do things. I just played, and I needed to solve problems. And I would say my coaches were my opponents and my teammates, because I watched them and I watched how they moved, and I watched what was successful for them and what wasn't. And I would go out and explore it and try it. And I've learned a lot of really goofy things that can be successful on the volleyball court because I saw some guy do it. One of my favorites is I watched Skylar Del Sol one time in a beach volleyball tournament in Sun Valley, Idaho. Weird place to do a beach volleyball tournament, but I watched him running along the net like he was going to set, and then he swiped his hand under the ball, and the ball shot off behind him at an angle just over the net and landed in about a foot off the net at the opposite sideline from swiping his hand under the ball in a way that made the ball go backwards. And I thought he did a magic trick. And so then I went into my gym and I went and started playing volleyball, and I started trying that all the time. And now I'm really good at it. And now I've got people learning it from me because they see me do it and they're like, what in the world? How is that possible? And then they try it and they realize it's possible. And, those are the kinds of things that make our sport exciting. And those are the kind of things that draw people to our sport. I mean, go back over the last 10 years and look at all of the ESPN highlights of volleyball, which there's not enough, but there are. The play of the day. Anytime the ESPN play of the day has been a volleyball thing, it's never been standard volleyball mechanics form. It's always been something outside the norm. It's always been something where a player had to adapt to a weird situation and make it happen. And that's what grabs people's attention, is when people do exciting and new things, not just the rote movements, robotic stuff over and over again. And I think if we encourage players to do that stuff more, we could grow the upper level of our game. And that is what you're seeing, I think, at the international levels. You're seeing a lot more players being given freedom to find success through focusing on the outcome. I mean, you look at the French men's team, you look at somebody like Irvin Ngape, who is probably one of the most adaptable players in the world, who does not do things by the book. He doesn't do things the way they are taught. He does things to score a point. And he's the MVP of the Olympics for a reason. And so I just think that when we overly constrain our players, we are limiting their upper levels of success.
They weren't doing this. They weren't doing this by coming from this approach. But I remember the first time when I started with adversity with Mike Hewlett's club, and we're at tryouts, and I'm a new guy, and I'm doing the 14s team, and we're kind of going through things, and they got down to the end, and they had 2 setters, and they had to pick one. And I was kind of curious about what they were going to do, and the question, and they just got around the group, and one of the coaches said, "Well, which one's the most creative?" And they said this one. I said, "Okay, that's our guy." And I'm like, I think I might be in the right place. So you never know, but that told me everything I needed to know about how that experience was going to go. And it was a great experience. So, Loren, this has been really great, and I appreciate you coming on board with us today. And BJ's, normally we cut these things off at an hour, but this was not worth cutting off at an hour by any stretch. I think there's a lot here for our audience, and our audience is usually after the fact, except for Ruben, who's been here the last couple of weeks. But I think it's a great introduction to this kind of thinking about coaching. And I wouldn't even say introduction, but a good explanation of why we're thinking about it. What are some of the reasons? What are some good things about it? How does it compare? And how do you prepare your players, your fellow coaches? One of the things I think we haven't touched on, but I think it's buried in all this, is how do you get that trust level up? I look at my coaching this year. I kind of came into a JV situation, and the first half of the season, there wasn't trust there. I would say, hey, if you trust me, you try this. And they wouldn't. And then by the mid of the season, they were like, okay, I'm ready. Tell me again how I could go about learning this. Here's what you should try. Work on this, that kind of thing. I think it's going to probably be the same way with your new coaches. You come in with credibility, which helps a ton. And there'll be some that will and won't. But even the ones who won't will start to trust something along the way. They're going to see something and go, I'm curious about that. But I think the biggest thing is you just got to be patient for that to happen. At least that's my experience, but it will.
Yeah, a really great point, because I think that the patience piece is one of the biggest ones that a lot of coaches or coach developers don't put enough importance on. And that's where I come back to that idea that my goal with working with these coaches this coming winter is going to be very much driven by the things I've learned working with athletes. I don't know why, but somewhere in my brain, there's been this distinction of that it's different. And I think it's the same. They're learners. And so we need to approach them as learners. And so maybe that is starting with, let's teach them how to learn. Let's learn how to learn. Not all coaches are good at that either. And so we start there and then identify some important principles that maybe the majority of the coaches agree on, and that then I can be a resource for them to help them understand how to better realize those principles in practice. I was when I was in Missouri, I did a little bit of this with a couple coaches, and there was one practice I went to at a club there where they were doing that classic thing where the coach is standing on the same side of the net. And all the girls are lined up in left back, and they're hitting specifically to the left of the left back, you're trying to mimic that hard cross shot and trying to teach them how to dig that shot. And I just asked, something I think I learned from John Kessel again is, what are they learning in this? And the coach said, they're learning how to dig the cross that hard cross shot, the ball to their left. And I said, well, what do kids find difficult about this shot? Why can't they dig it without you doing this? Why were they struggling? And through conversation, eventually the coach, admitted that, well, they're not reacting to what they're seeing well. And I said, okay, well, are you presenting them the same thing that they would see in a game so that they can learn how to react to it? And he said, well, yeah, they're going to see my thumb down and see me hitting that hard shot. I'm like, but what other things might prevent them from seeing that in a game situation? So we got into that conversation about how the block can sometimes obscure your view, the fact that they're up high, the fact that, well, maybe they don't know that the ball is going to be hit to their left every single time, so they've got to prepare for everything, instead of what I saw in this drill he was doing, the players taking a step to their left before he ever even contacted the ball, because he had told them, I'm hitting the ball to your left. So a lot of them looked really great at it, but then in games they weren't good at it. And so through this conversation with this coach, I got him to at least admit, I don't know if it changed anything he did in practice after I left, but I got him to at least admit that the hardest part of playing defense is reading the hitter, and that he wasn't giving his players an opportunity to really read a hitter in this drill. So really what it was, all they were working on was the movement of moving to your left to dig a ball. And then try to have a conversation with him about, well, why do we move? We move because of what we see, and we see because of what we move. And so if we divorce the movement from the perception, we're not really doing much other than maybe some strength training that happens to have a ball involved. And so, it was a good conversation, but I don't think it changed anything because it was a one-off conversation. And so I think that's where, working with this club for at least this winter, and hopefully and most likely for many winters to come, it'll give me that opportunity to touch back on these points and to have these conversations multiple times, which is what it took for me. I mean, I don't know how many conversations I had with people who were pushing me in this direction before it just finally clicked for me, and not necessarily direct conversations, but reading articles. I mean, I remember reading through all of John Kessel's Grow the Game blog posts for years and shaking my head and saying, this can't work. Like, this is ridiculous. Why would anybody think this is how you coach volleyball? And I feel pretty stupid about all that now, because now John's a good friend of mine and been a great mentor. And now I'm like, I look back on all those articles and I'm like, man, I had an opportunity so much earlier in my volleyball career to change the way I coached to something that felt more natural and real to me, but also was more efficient and better for my players. And I pushed it away because it was different than anything I'd ever seen. And it seemed on the surface to be wrong to me. But ultimately, I'm an evidence-based person. Like, that's how I lead my life. Pretty much every choice I make in my life is based on the data that I can collect around me. And that was really what turned it for me, was seeing the data about motor learning and skill acquisition and understanding how our bodies actually work and learn. And then applying that in the gym with my kids and seeing over 2 or 3 seasons, just an absolute immense difference in their volleyball IQs and their ability to play the game. And so that's, I guess that's the patience piece, is you gotta be in. If you're going to teach somebody how to do something different, you got to be in for it the long haul. You can't just do it on a weekend coaching clinic. So.
Yeah, that's our mutual friend Harjeev Singh says, why in volleyball, and really any sport, why do we work on the antecedent, on the ending? We're only working on the movement. We're not working on the why do we get to that movement portion, right? That's the important part. Let what you see drive the movement. The movements themselves, and Jim Keen's said on this podcast, the movements of volleyball are not that hard. You have to put your arms here, your legs there. You move your arm like this to swing or whatever it is. The movements aren't hard. It's getting those movements in the right place at the right time
Right.
that are really
which
difficult.
is all about perception. Yeah, it's all about
Yeah,
perceiving the right things. I
yeah,
know that
yeah, right.
Mark Lebedew, who used to be the Australian men's national coach, and now he's coaching in not in Poland anymore. Can't remember where he's at now, but he has he's put out some blog posts to the effect of what we perceive as a lack of speed or quickness is actually a lack of readiness. And I just think that's to the same point. Like, readiness includes not only how are you standing and how are you as far as physically ready, but also what are you looking at, and are you ready for that? Like in that example I gave, are you ready for that ball to be hit to your left? If you're not ready for it to be hit to your left, then it's going to get you every time. But if you're standing and seeing in a way that allows you to be ready for whatever happens, you're going to be a lot better defensive player. And the more that you see what's happening, the more that you're going to start to read and narrow down the anything could happen to here's the top 2 most likely things to happen in this moment. And then you're going to be even a better defensive player because you've narrowed down all of the possible outcomes to a much more limited choice, which gets you into that anticipation mode, And one of my favorite sayings, and I've been trying to work it into this new view of coaching, but Healy said this, the Stanford coach, back when he wasn't the Stanford coach. And he said it at a coaching clinic that he teaches his players to anticipate with their mind and not with their body, which I always took as read, don't react until you know what's happening. Read before you know to narrow down the possibilities, but then react when you know. And that's just one I've said countless times over the years to players and to coaches and to myself. I'll say it to myself when I'm playing because I guessed and went the wrong way. And Murphy's Law of Volleyball says if you move one way before the ball's contacted, the ball's going to go the other way.
Right.
And so it just anticipate with your mind and not with your body. But I think that really relates to this ecological dynamics and constraints-led approach to coaching. Is there isn't a prescripted way to react to what's happening in front of you. You need to read and see what's happening and then react in whatever way you feel capable to get the goal. If your defense is the goal, then your goal is to get the ball up. So whatever you got to do, get the ball up. And there's, if people are always, if we as coaches are we limit the outcome by limiting what they are what they are allowed to do, right? Because so many coaches will punish if you don't do the right movement. And so in their minds, they're allowed to only do a few different things in this moment. Well, what if none of those are going to work and you need to do something else? I've witnessed so many coaches who severely punish players for using their feet. And I'm like, there are times where that is the best option. And if you're going to punish them because they chose the best option, you're limiting their capabilities severely.
Yeah,
And your own
as you said that, I was thinking about I was playing against a team from a club that's well known for its regimented, very do this or else approach to coaching the sport. And I was watching them.
who could
This
that
team,
be, Steve?
I don't know, and so I'm watching them play, and their libero is, like playing jazz. I mean, he's everywhere, and I'm like, oh. And I came up to the coach afterwards. I said, I really enjoyed that, but I'm curious, how are you doing that? And his comment was, well, we're like a fours team. Nobody cares, so they let me do what I need to do, and this kid knows what he's doing. And, I was like, okay, I get you. Thank goodness for that, because that kid's going to be a much better player than the guys on the ones team.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny what can appear, what can we can elicit from a kid by just giving them the autonomy and the freedom to explore, and that's another thing we didn't even touch on, is that extremely massive part of coaching, which is the idea of autonomy, and that those prescriptive coach driven programs tend to not give a lot of autonomy. And even the information processing side of things, because there's always this perfect movement pattern, it does remove a lot of autonomy. Whereas if we have this more constraints led ecological dynamics idea behind coaching, it relies on autonomy to be successful. And Gabrielle Wolf has her optimal theory, where she has shown pretty conclusively that there are 3 elements to motor learning that if you can combine those 3 elements, you create an immensely better learning environment and a much faster learners. And one of those is autonomy, and that's a massive part of it. In fact, I've joked around for years that I was just going to create a club that was going to be called Autonomy Volleyball Club, and like put something on there that our shirts would say autonomy matters, just so that, people started to understand the role autonomy has in any learning environment. It doesn't have to be volleyball. Adults, kids, dogs, whatever, autonomy matters. And you add in the external focus of attention and the increased expectancy of positive results. You put those 3 things into a learning environment, and you have kids who are learning super fast, having a lot of fun, and performing at levels above, potentially above other kids. So.
All right, we are way past our hour. Steve, you may have to break this
Yeah, we are.
apart when you put out the podcast. But
I'm just going to tell them, listen, get a beverage, settle down, and settle in, because it's a long discussion, but a great one.
It's a great conversation, and Loren, thanks for coming on and on short notice. And I learned something every time we talk, so it was really neat to have you on here today, for sure.
I appreciate it very much. I learn something every time I do anything like this, because I think we learn through the connections, the interconnections with other people, and as we present our ideas or we hear other people's ideas, we get to refine and change ourselves. So it's cool to be on something like this, and I'll keep you guys posted how things are going in California as far as trying to get other people to start thinking like this too.
So what are you saying? We learn by doing? Is that what you just said?
I did, actually. Yeah, I know it's a weird concept. Maybe a lot of coaching clinics might take that concept into advisement in the way that they're trying to teach coaches how to be better coaches. Right now, most coaches clinics just are teaching coaches how to be good listeners.
Our next topic will be athletic directors as constraints, but we'll save that for
Yeah, and you take that into the club world, and you could have club directors as constraints. Yep. So,
yeah, you bet.
It's probably the biggest constraint a coach has to deal with.
When you say that, I think back to Mike Hewlett, and that was one of the things that actually made my time there so great. He came in, and I said, "So what do you expect?" He said, "You're running your own show. I'll come by and ask questions every now and then, but that's about it." And it was an exploratory kind of place, a good learning environment. So there you go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why he is known as one of the greats. So.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, we'll see everybody next time. Thanks for everybody. And Ruben, thanks for your great comments during this session. And look forward to our next session. And Loren, good luck with the trip and enjoy California.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.